Welcome to a special edition of the Behind the Art Inspiration podcast, where we delve into the creative processes and stories of 14 artists around the world. In these episodes, we go behind the scenes with artists who are part of the International Online Art Collective, learning about their inspirations, challenges, and techniques while collaborating on the Chain Reaction project. Beginning with one single piece, each piece informs the next piece, provoking a chain reaction of other artworks until we have created a total of 100 works, assembled into one big multimedia installation. In this episode, we have the pleasure of interviewing artist Cheryl, remind me of your last name.
Barill, thank you for that.
Yes, who hails from a suburb of Detroit in Michigan. Through our conversation with Cheryl, we'll gain insights into her creative processes and the inspirations that drive her work. I'm artist and host Caroline Cart, and I'm excited to bring you this episode from my DC studio. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as we go behind the scenes with Cheryl. So Cheryl, I know that you're an oil painter. And I know that, and I've looked through some of your works, and the one that I just am really touched by is the one where you were actually reacting to my work, and it's your very first one in the chain. I can tell you that the artist before me was Barbara. She's an abstract painter. And so what I brought from Barbara's work was the palette. I was in DC. I was, I think, doing live painting, and the church that I was painting had these beautiful flowers. And so that was my reaction. And then I sent it to you, and what you created was just beautiful. Tell us about that.
Thank you for that. Oh my gosh. So I'm a very eclectic painter. And my background, as you said, is in oil paint. I also integrate a lot of metals into my other bodies of work. But I was heavily influenced by Monet and some of the other painters from that era, not necessarily impressionistic. I like using a freedom of movement in my brushstroke, and I love using strong color. Mm-hmm. So in your painting, it was funny because it was like, it was my first time in the chain, and I did not know what your inspiration was. Mm-hmm. And so I was thinking, like, I had all kinds of things going on in my head. I remember it so vividly. I thought, like, oh, maybe they've all gotten off to like a floral start because yours was floral in theme. And I thought, like, well, except, it's like, if it's going to be an interesting chain reaction, I want to stir it up. So I looked and I thought, like, well, how can I do that? It was still having it connected to yours. So you had a flower in yours that brought to mind something totally different. So I was influenced by the color and by the movement that I found in the flower. And then I translated that into a figure, the movement from the flower. And I took one of the colors that was in your painting, and I put a hat on my figure that matched the color that was in your flower. So the figure represents the flower, actually. And the rest of it, just my total infatuation with Monet and some of his pastoral scenes. So it was a complete integration of that. And it was also a willingness to stir up where I thought maybe the chain had, like, if somebody started with flowers and if it was just all floral, I wanted something to create an about the face and disrupt the chain, but still be the chain.
The funny part is that in that very first reaction, we weren't allowed to see anybody else's work, right? And so your guess,
just the one that someone sent us, right?
Your guess was not correct. It was actually not anything to do with flowers, I brought the flowers in. But
Which I learned, and you're telling me that you followed Barbara, and
yeah,
I didn't even like cheat peek at the list because we could do that if we
yeah,
wanted to like, look and kind of guess, but I
mhm,
really wanted to keep it squeaky clean for the integrity of the chain.
yes. So another thing I noticed was, and this happens a lot with artists in their interpretation of what they see and what they capture. Um, in my piece, I did like I zoomed in on a couple of flowers, so it was like the macro, right? And so you, where mine was right in your face, yours was like you said, that scene looking out into like a great vast land. So it's interesting the play of the really up close and then going into the great big, yeah. I think that's
Yeah.
why I found it so beautiful.
Thank you. And I, again, like some, because I paint a lot of dancers and I take the feeling of the movement. So when I'm working on my dancer series, I always say it's not about the dancer or the dance, but what compels them. So I always work on the emotional component of the movement. And I often exaggerate a gesture of the arm or the leg or some part of the body. So there was one flower in particular that I just kept feeling it as a dancer. But
Mhm.
then it didn't turn into a dancer, but another figure.
Right,
So,
right.
but that was the background origin of like how my mind thinks as an artist when I'm doing figure.
Mhm.
So kept feeling that. And I thought like, okay, I have to go with that. And then, like I said, my willingness to like stir up the chain in case that was needed. So it's fun
Right.
finding out it wasn't.
Now, another one that I want to take note of is, I don't know what the title of it is, but what I saw was Purple Mountains, and it had such a flavor. I didn't even have to look it up. I kind of figured you must have been following Greta.
Hmm.
And tell us about that experience too.
Yeah. Okay. So she's one of the artists whose work really is so different than mine that I've been like really curious about because I think the emotional component and what drives us is similar. I think there's an overlap. And she does this elemental series. It's her collage work.
Mhm.
And I think it's generally on some of her smaller work, but not always. So she had this beautiful elemental piece and she takes the torn pieces of paper and creates a sense of mountains. And a lot of times some of her papers will be like from a musical score, so there'll be like some musical notes in that mountain, and that always touches me deeply because I have a musical
Mhm.
past and present as a vocalist. So that's always touched my heart deeply, and I love the way she plays this. So when I followed her and she used one of her elemental designs and instead of some of her other work, I got excited. I got right to work thinking I'm going to make this one of my gold leaf pieces.
Mm.
And when I'm working with the gold leaf, I also work with other materials that change the reflectivity. So, in other words, like the way the light hits it. So, that's one of the things I love about working with the metals along with the oil paint, because the oil paint can have an incredibly bright pigment that when the light hits it, it lights up. But if the light hits it a different way and catches the metals light up, and the oil paint, even if it's white, seems to be in a shadow.
Mhm.
Um, then you add to it some of these newer materials in recent years that's called interference and the iridescence ones that are available now in oils as well. So that piece, um, if people get to see the installation live as we bring it to the public as an installation, they will see that like when they walk around and the light changes how it hits that piece, the different parts of the elemental series will pop out. So I love the movement that her series has or her work had, and I just took that and went with that and really experimented with it and treated it, even though it was a painting, I kept thinking collage. I wanted it to have the integrity of
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
because I work with collage, so it was like fresh and new and a little bit exciting, and so it gave me a different inspiration than what I would typically have with my materials.
Mhm. And now we're going to jump to
Huh.
your portrait
Ah,
at round 6. Um,
yes.
yeah, I see the metal, the metal in there, the gold leafing, I'm assuming. And so tell us a little bit about that experience.
That one was like a different challenge. I always love returning to a more traditional style of painting. Way back when I did photorealistic work, and the artist who I followed on that was Adela, and she's a photorealistic painter, and she works in a rather muted palette, which is the exact opposite of mine. I work with color complements. I use the prismatic scale. Again, from like studying a lot of things about the science of color that Monet around that time, was evolving as a science. And so I've often looked at her work and thought like, wow, how different that is. Like she uses a muted palette to create a different emotional response. And my preference is using prismatic opposites of color. So I was kind of excited. I didn't change, I changed up the model's features just a bit. And so so the model I took, and then I just kind of blended some of my styles and experimented with it. I would say that with the exception of my first one, I've treated each one of these as an experiment
Mm.
to just see, is there something new and juicy, like a little bit of mind magic for the creative process moving forward.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Well,
so that's what
Cheryl,
went.
before we go, did you want to tell me anything else about the chain reaction experience or story or anything?
Yeah, I I personally had a lot going on in my life right after we started, or right around the time we started. I went through divorce, and I found it incredibly difficult to juggle everything that I needed to juggle and be able to like show up enough for this project with the integrity that I would want. And I found working like with a group and a collaborative where most of us have not met in person yet. It's like the support felt very much art beyond art family. Um, and a couple times when I was really struggling, I'd reach out to some of the international members and really found a lot of camaraderie and was touched by that deeply. Um, and that ended up being an important part of how I responded to the project as a whole, I think, in a way that's just the way it affects the creative process. And and keeping this short, I just have to leave it there. So,
Thanks. And
yeah.
Cheryl, where can people learn more about you and your art?
Uh, well, I have my Instagram, and that's Cheryl.a.Barill. But preferably my website, because it has a lot of storytelling about who I am as an artist and what each collection means to me. So, and that is CherylBarillArt.com. And Barill is Barill, Cheryl with a C. So
And so I'll put that in the show notes as well as all the
thank you.
information of how they can learn about the International Online Art Collective, as well as the Chain Reaction Project. So
For
our
sure.
website, our social, and where we're going to be exhibiting first. But I want to thank everybody for joining us while we share our love of connection, collaboration, and art. Thank you again, Cheryl.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this.
Mhm. Bye.